There it is. Now, what are you going to look for? Lost youth?
No. Flaming youth. Say, did I tell you the faculty is throwing a party, a come-as-you-were party, and the theme is the Roaring Twenties?
Oh, that I'll have to see. But, you know, you'll have to find a way to lose a few pounds to go as you were.
Oh, I don't know. A coonskin coat can cover a multitude of calories, you know.
That coonskin coat's right under these pictures if you want it.
Well, fine. Let's have it out and have a look at it.
I put it there to keep the glasses from breaking.
Sure.
Well, it smells as though the moths didn't get a chance to wear it.
Well, maybe the moths weren't going to a faculty dance either. Here, help me into it. We'll try it off.
Oh, dear. I don't know whether you can get into this again or not.
Seems heavier than it used to. Hey, that's all right. That's right. All it needs is a pennant now. Off to the football games.
Well, I hope you're not too warm. Oh, come here. You've had enough silliness now. Tell me about that party. You haven't told me a thing.
Oh, well, they got carried away a little bit. Help me out of this thing.
Dear. Now, listen. When is this party to be?
Oh, the party, yes. It's to be next Friday night. And costumes and songs and dances are all to be of the 20s.
I can see me doing a Charleston.
Oh, I don't know. We can still Charleston, you know. Maybe we better sit that one out. Well, say, there's still the shimmy, you know, and, the black bottom. How about that?
Oh, my dear, I'm afraid you'll never take a prize.
Well.
Say, I've got to go find something to wear. You know, I don't think I have a thing.
Oh, you'll find something up there you can drag out.
No, I just... Howard, I do remember. That little green dress.
There you are.
Now, listen, don't get this junk all in the
I'll
middle
get
of the
this
floor.
all packed up and out of the way. Don't worry about that. Between you and me and the goalpost, I don't think she's going to get into that little green dress. Well, she'll find something, though. We've got an attic full of trunks up there, enough stuff to supply a costume shop. You know, they yield a lot of interesting material to work with, though. Now, for instance, in this trunk, I've got pictures and all kinds of antique items. They should be kind of interesting to browse through again. Let's see what I have. Well, here, right on top, a drawing by John Held, Jr. Now, just look at it. Now, this is a starting point for showing how the arts were reflecting the life and times of the period. Just look at that. The coonskin coat, the rolled stockings, the short skirt, and the blaring saxophone. All signs of the times. The flagrant, ballyhooed, loud, hectic jazz age. You know, I wonder sometimes, how did this jazz age suddenly get started after our earlier years of idealism and reform? Let's look at it for a minute. The war had turned our youth loose for really the first time, and many of the taboos and traditional restraints were broken now. The generation after the war craved excitement and speed and new sensations. They were ready to play. And almost everyone was tired of what he thought had been fighting someone else's war. People were disillusioned. We'd lost faith in President Wilson, who had formerly been our hero, just as we had lost faith in his peace treaties. Yes, this lost generation which survived the war felt like celebrating. Well, there was one kind of celebrating that couldn't be done legally. Not since 1920, when the 18th Amendment came in and along came Prohibition. No, in those 14 years that America was legally dry, thousands of forms of beating the law were devised. Here, this old hip flask. It originated in the Prohibition era. And the speakeasies, the forerunner of our nightclubs, sprang up. The owner peered out at the caller through a tiny peephole, and if you knew Joe, why, you usually got in. Illegal whiskey and bathtub gin made big business. And when the goods were found, they were just dumped out. That illegal brew was mighty high-priced stuff, too. Then Prohibition agents appeared on the scene and became the law of the land. Moe Smith and Izzy Einstein became most famous agents through much newspaper publicity. And along with nabbing the Flask, these two ingenious rascals from New York's Lower East Side became known all over the country, loved by the drives, feared by the bartenders, but laughed at by all. Nothing was too much for them, no disguise too great. Well, funny thing happened. Once Izzy heard that some soda fountains near Cornell University were not confining their sales to soda pop. So he disguised himself as an undergraduate, put on a little white cap and white linen knickers, and for 5 foot, 255-pound Izzy, the knickers weren't so little. But he strolled around the campus and addressed everybody with a mustache as professor. Everybody that had a beard was dean. Then, having established himself as a student, he dashed one by one into the soda fountains which sold liquor, shouting, sizzle boom, rah, 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 you know, that sort of thing. The laughing speakeasy boys thought he was quite a character and gladly sold him liquor. Then he gave them in return one of his own special kinds of diplomas, a summons. Well, yeah, here they are, Izzy and Moe. Well, all of the effects of Prohibition weren't that funny. Sometimes people died from drinking homemade brews. Gangsterism flourished. The effects on our national morals was astounding. Other things were happening in our national scene, too. In 1920, the first vote of the independent woman helped elect Warren Harding as president. The suffragettes had finally won their battle. When Harding was elected, he promised a return to normalcy. No more foreign wars. No more problems. Harding was just about the friendliest man to enter the White House. His popularity was just unbelievable. It wasn't until after his death that the trouble started. That's another story. It was Harding who dedicated the tomb of the unknown soldier in 1921. Here, I have some pictures of some sculpturing from my files I'd like to show. Yes, here we are. You know, the years of the early 20s found many of our prominent sculptors working on war memorials. Now, of course, there were those who created pieces of sculpturing to express the hopes of mankind and to comment on the life around them. Now, this first picture is the work of Paul Manship. He is known for his decorative sculpture. This is one figure on a monument in honor of the men who fought in the First World War and is located at the American Academy in Rome. This is another of his works, called The Indian Hunter. And as we see here, Manship's works aren't entirely realistic and tend to be somewhat classical in nature. This is called Dancer and Gazelles. Another one of the sculptors doing a great deal of work during the 20s was Joe Davidson. Now, in contrast to the work of Manship, Joe Davidson was a sculptor who worked in rugged, realistic lives. He made a series of vivid portrait busts of notables of the World War, and a great many of the world's famous people sat for him. Here is his bust of Dr. Albert Einstein, just one of the many famous people he has portrayed. A prolific sculptor of war memorials was Joseph Pollia, a member of the National Sculpture Society. Most of his memorials are to be found in the New England states. Here, a soldier looking at the grave of his buddy is but one of many of his. Sharing honors with the best-known sculptors of America since 1900 is Daniel French. For his tribute to the soldiers of the World War, he created several figures. This is his work called In Flanders Field. But Daniel French is perhaps best known for his statue of Lincoln, which sits in this Greek temple in Washington, D.C. And inside is the massive 20-foot high seated figure made of Georgia marble. This statue truly measures a great man and is simple, beautiful, and dignified in character. The Lincoln Memorial is a case where architect, painter, and sculptor work together to produce a handsome symbol. It was in the early part of the 1920s that Laredo Taft completed his Fountain of Time in Chicago. This is a sculpture of a group of figures to symbolize the various conditions of mankind. They rise like the motion of waves, pass in review, and sink back again into the earth. And watching over all the scene is the brooding figure symbolizing eternity. And so our sculptors worked, commenting on life and its meaning, building memorials, portraying our great men. There were so many other sculptors that I haven't mentioned, the names of Zorak and Lachaise and Barnard and Young and Epstein are among them. Well, you can see that during the early 20s, the war remained in the minds of many of our sculptors, and they, like all Americans, were anxious to get back to normal. And as Americans strived to regain this normalcy, they became pleasure seekers. The search for pleasure was a main part of our lives, and it was a great era for stage reviews and huge musical extravaganzas. And those light operas, musicals, and stage reviews have always been a source of our popular songs, and the music during the 20s was no exception either. But there was something else in the air, and that something was jazz. And that music, probably more than any other kind, serves to describe the spirit of the 20s. Usually, the jazz musicians deliberately sought to produce unusual notes. The tempo of the music was rapid and exciting. In fact, the expression, jazz it up, came to mean just that, to put excitement into any activity. And along with the rapid music, the odd notes, there was an erratic syncopation. The melody didn't fall on the beat. And the rhythm was, as one song called it, crazy rhythm. Well, this was the era of jazz, which many have named the folk music of America. It was flying high during these years when Jelly Roll Morton and King Oliver and Louis Armstrong and their bands were playing in Chicago. And what bands they were. Hey, I've got some old recordings made in the 20s. Let's see what we can find among them. You know, one thing, the violins, which used to take the leads in the orchestras, were eliminated. And the saxophone became the heart and soul of the jazz band. Why, those saxophones could make imitations, they could blare and blast, even coo and sound very sensuous. Well, here's a spot on this one that I think you'll like to hear. It'll tell you just what I mean. Now, listen for the sax. Wow, wasn't that jazzy? You know, along with the jazz bands, toward the latter part of the 20s, came the torch singer. And Helen Morgan, with her husky voice, sang 10 Cents a Dance, And Libby Holman just lit fires with her body and soul. But of course you can't forget the male singers. This was the starting of the heyday of the crooners. Rudy Valley with his creamy tenor used to have all the ladies swooning when he used his megaphone. They've got a picture of him here with that famous megaphone. Rudy was the man who revived the Maine Stein song. It's kind of an ironic twist during the days of Prohibition, wouldn't you say? But most of the songs were, commenting on the times with frankness and earthiness and daring. The college students probably reflected the times as much as any single group. There was one song which really showed their attitude toward life, and especially their clothes. It was called Collegiate. One of the lines went like this, something. Trousers baggy, and our clothes look raggy, and that's just about the way they dressed, too. Although they had enough money, this was a time when parents were just spending lavishly on their children. But the college people just chose to wear their clothes like that. There were a lot of nonsensical songs, too, sprang up during this era of the 1920s. Oh, Yes, We Have No Bananas, Swept Over the Country, Crazy Over Horses, and Mr. Gallagher and Mr. Sheen. All were songs of fun and songs which reflected a light-headed surface of society. Kind of makes you wonder how Old Man River from Showboat could fit in and survive. Seems as though it portrayed an inner spirit of the times, a longing for rest. Well, I don't know. Well, let's see. Any more tunes of the 20s in here? Oh, yes. One we can't forget, the Charleston. That's the one. Just remember that? It swept the country with a rage of waving arms and knocked knees and bent elbows and twisting feet. Of course, only the most energetic acrobatic types could even attempt to do it. Here, listen to this. Well, that'll give you some idea of what it sounded like. Oh, well, so you did find something. Wait a minute, wait till I turn this thing off. Think you can still do the Charleston?
Well, I'm not going to worry about that. I'll be lucky if I have something to wear.
Well, I see you found the dress anyway.
Well, yes, I found it, but look at it.
Oh.
Would you believe it?
Well, perhaps we'll have to forget about the boyish look for now. How's the hat?
Oh, the hat's fine. It fits. At least I'll have something to wear.
Well, you can always find an old fur coat or something to finish out the
Oh,
costume.
well, I'll work out something. Say, what have you been doing? I thought you'd have this trunk all repacked.
Well, I got to playing some old tunes from the 20s over here. Forgot all about the trunk.
You're certainly going all out for this party. You know, I wouldn't think too much about it because, well, I doubt if very many of the faculty members will be doing the Charleston.
Well, admittedly, they're not as young as they were then.
You know, Howard, what I'd like to see them do? I'd like to see them try that marathon dancing.
Marathon dancing. Say, I'd forgotten all about that. See, that's an idea for us. Let's us go as the marathon dancers after their 3,000th hour of dancing, you know?
Oh, do you think we could look the part?
Well.
See, you've got a picture of it here somewhere, though. Let's find that and use that as a model.
All right. Was right here under the Mahjong set. Here.
Oh, yes. Uh-huh. Well, no, on second sober thought, I don't think we'd better. Say, didn't they play any slow or good old, really slow folk music in those days?
Sorry to say, most unfortunate, there were no ballads. The tempo of the 20s was just too fast for them.
Oh, dear. Well, surely there must have been something in a classical vein. Well, let me think. Yes, there's a copy of it here in this trunk, Rhapsody in Blue.
Oh, yes. Well, that's scarcely a classic. See, that's more along the line of symphonic jazz. But how could you come dressed as the Rhapsody in Blue?
Well, I'd get out my old blue house coat.
Oh, no. We'll have better stick with the flapper dresses. Well, here's the music right here.
Oh. Well, that's got a picture of George Gershwin on it. I thought all the time it would be a picture of Paul Whiteman.
No, Paul Whiteman's closely associated with the piece because his band introduced it, you see. That's about the time he was trying to civilize jazz.
Well, you can't deny the importance of Gershwin anyway. I don't suppose I'll get them mixed up again.
Well, I'd better get this trunk packed up and get it out of here.
Well, don't ask me to help you because I'm going to fix this dress, and if I can, I'm just going to make it a wee bit larger.
Good luck. Well, it reminds me of all those old times. You get out this old music and these costumes and things. But it was a time of light and frivolous and surface fun. You know, under the frivolity and fun of the Charleston dances, the lively music, there began to creep a sinister and disquieting undertone. Americans heard ugly rumors of a huge Bolshevik conspiracy against the United States. Now, partly because of the Russian Revolution in 1919, when the Bolsheviks overthrew the Tsars, millions of Americans seriously thought that a Red Revolution might begin in America at any time. And a rumor swept across the country in early 1919 that a nationwide Bolshevik plot was afoot to murder every outstanding public official who had in any way involved himself in a labor case. Sounds fantastic to us now. But remember, the revolution in Russia had made us fearful of anything that sounded like a labor revolt. And packages containing bombs had been found addressed to many prominent individuals, including Attorney General Palmer. And a short time later, Palmer's house was bombed. Well, the result was that Palmer started his now infamous raids. And within 2 months, almost 5,000 aliens had been rounded up. Without benefit of war, families were separated, people seized in the dead of night on suspicion only, prisoners denied the right to a lawyer, and eventually 550 of these radicals were deported. Now, this mass hysteria was all helped along by labor unrest. Labor was reluctant to lose the gains it had made during the war. The worst outbreaks were the great steel strikes in Chicago and Gary, Indiana in 1919 and 1920. The workers were fighting for a union that would help, that would really do something about the very bad conditions in the steel industry. And they held out even after federal troops were brought in. But eventually, they had to return to work without their union. They had very little public support, you see, because these were the years of the Big Red Hunt, and the press was portraying the labor leaders as Bolsheviks. Well, during the early years of the 1920s, a mass hysteria was at its peak. Here, let me dig into my rogues gallery over here. People both famous and infamous. I have 2 pictures here. One of Sacco and Vanzetti, and the other of characters in the play, What Price Glory. Now, the first, Sacco and Vanzetti. These were perhaps 2 victims of the mass hysteria which was highest in early 1920. A payroll robbery and murder occurred in Massachusetts. And these 2 men, Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, were arrested. And that case dragged out for 7 years before they were finally executed. And I'm telling you, I don't think there's ever been a better example of hysteria at work. You see, the evidence against these men was pretty flimsy. And people are still undecided as to whether or not they were guilty. But here's the point. They were both radicals, and they had helped to organize strikes. So, well, in the great public argument that sprang up concerning them, people claimed that they were being executed for their political beliefs. And it became such an issue that letters to the governor, and picket lines and demonstrations of one kind or another were formed. The slogan, "Save Sacco and Vanzetti," was on the lips of most of the Americans. And by now, the Red Scare was diminishing. Well, scarcely a year after they were executed, the first of two plays about them appeared on Broadway. They were both written by the same man, Maxwell Anderson. Now, his first was "Gods of the Lightning," and he cried out passionately, some people thought too passionately, against this mass hysteria. The second play was "Winterset." We'll discuss that again. Wonderful play. But before he had written either of these plays, Anderson collaborated with Lawrence Stallings in writing "What Price Glory?" And here we have the second picture from my drawer. This was the first American play to portray modern war and soldiers in a realistic way. Tremendously popular, but it stunned audiences with its hard-boiled cynicism and rowdy language. Now, Maxwell Anderson and others in his time, Sidney Howard, George Kelly, deliberately set out to bring real maturity to the theater by commenting on the American scene. But sometimes a playwright can make just as telling a comment, even if he isn't directly concerned with social criticism. And this is where Eugene O'Neill comes into the picture. O'Neill's plays will always be a part of the list of American classics. And he wrote a great many during the 20s. There was "Beyond the Horizon," "Emperor Jones," "Our Wilderness," "The Hairy Ape," "Desire Under the Elms." These are just a few. His plays weren't anything like the conventional plays of the times. They used all kinds of dramatic tricks and techniques, which at times confused the audience. And still, they were successful. Now, why? Because O'Neill was telling the people about themselves. They loved it. He looked at the flappers and the sheiks, and he saw the sickness from which all America was suffering. Sickness which O'Neill believed was caused by a complete lack of any real meaning to our lives at the time. His plays were built around that central theme, and they seemed to mean something to the bewildered, pleasure-seeking Americans of the 20s. Well, there you have it. People in the fields of music, drama, and sculpture commenting on the life and times of the 1920s. Quite a remarkable period. Well, I better get this trunk packed up. And when you call in again, we'll talk some more about these fabulous 20s. Bye now.